I learned early how quickly a northern kingdom could turn its back on a woman. In the village where I grew up, winter arrived like a verdict. Smoke thinned, food rationed, and kindness became another luxury the men claimed they couldn't afford. When the snow fell heavy enough to muffle footsteps, people pretended they couldn't hear the hunger in their neighbors' doors. I was the kind of woman they used anyway. I wasn't born noble. I wasn't born blessed. I simply knew how to keep things alive, how to mend cloth until it didn't snag, how to coax herbs into bitterness without letting them lose their strength, how to stretch a broth so the bottom of the pot still promised something. That made me useful. It also made me expendable. The night I broke into the castle, I didn't do it because I wanted glory. I did it because I had already been denied the ordinary mercy of survival. My brother, my only remaining person who still looked at me like I was a person instead of a resource, had a fever that wouldn't break. The healers warned me that if I waited for the next shipment of medicine, his lungs would turn black with cold. My brother's hands had been shaking for days, and his eyes had gone dull, as if sleep was a door he couldn't quite open. The village storehouse held one thing that could still fight that kind of sickness: winter salt and distilled silver. The old woman who kept the storehouse held her rules tighter than my brother's breath. "She'll be fine," she told me, as if she could speak my brother out of dying. Then she smiled, sweet and cruel. "Or she won't. Either way, the king's taxes must be paid." Taxes. As if my brother's illness was a coin missing from her ledger. I begged her. I promised I'd work twice as long, triple if I had to. I offered what I had: braids of thread, scraps of saved fat to render into oil. I even offered my time to carry water until my shoulders burned. Her answer didn't change. That was when I began to listen to the rumor that traveled with the wind. Soft at first, then sharp when people needed it to be true. The Alpha King kept a sealed chest of winter salt in the castle's lowest corridor. No one could reach it without keys made from iron that drank sound. No one could open it without knowing the right words. But rumor is only useful if you're desperate enough to become dangerous. So I became dangerous. I waited until the guard shifts grew careless. I learned which torch frames left shadows long enough to hide a woman's outline. I counted the beats of footsteps on stone. I kept my breath steady, even when my heart tried to run ahead of me. I didn't steal for greed. I stole for the person who had once held my hand and believed I could survive. I reached the corridor doors and found them. Blunt iron, riveted shut. Carved with the same frost knot patterns the villagers drew in chalk whenever they thought the castle was too far to reach. My hands knew how to work through locks, not with violence, with patience. I loosened the ward by rubbing the correct oil into the grooves, the one herb wife trick I'd learned when I was still small enough to be called child. It tasted like bitterness and smelled like crushed needles. When the ward softened, it exhaled cold into the air like a living thing. The chest was there, heavy, silent, protected by more than metal. I touched the lid, and the world seemed to hold its breath with me. Then, from somewhere behind the doorways, a deep sound rolled through the corridor, like a storm deciding where to break. I froze, not from fear alone, from recognition. I had heard stories. I had always assumed the stories were meant to scare people into staying small. But when the sound hit the stone, it wasn't imagination. It was power, malevolent in its control, not chaotic. Like the kingdom itself had chosen a voice. Someone stepped into the corridor. I couldn't see his face at first because the light was wrong, moonlight slipping through high windows, catching the edges of fur and steel. But I felt him the way you feel a blade before it touches your skin. His gaze pinned me like I had already been caught by every sentence ever spoken against me. Daxton Rhymeborn, the Alpha King. I had never seen a man who looked both carved and alive. Thick shoulders beneath a cloak stitched in dark thread. Frost-white markings along his cheekbones like a map only he could read. His breath came in controlled clouds, as if even his lungs had learned restraint. He didn't draw his sword. He didn't need to. The corridor warmed around his stillness, not with heat, but with pressure. Like the air was being told to obey him, my mind scrambled for an answer that wouldn't get me killed. Because I already knew what happens to women in northern realms. If you're not useful, you're dangerous. If you're dangerous, you're punished. If you're punished, the story becomes simpler for everyone. I swallowed. I didn't mean... My voice died on my tongue. Daxton approached, one slow step at a time, each movement deliberate enough to feel like a threat wrapped in etiquette. Then he looked past me, to where my hands hovered over the chest. "Tell me," he said, voice low and rough as winter timber, "why the dead-laced corridor called you by name." Dead-laced corridor. The words weren't something he guessed. They were something he knew. My throat tightened. I forced myself to breathe. "I needed what's inside," I said carefully, forcing my gaze to his eyes instead of his mouth. I refused to look like prey. "Someone was sick. I can fix it." His expression didn't change, but the stones seemed to shiver beneath his boots. "You broke in," he said. "I opened a ward," I corrected, because my pride mattered more than fear in that moment. I didn't hurt anyone. He didn't react, yet I felt his beast move inside him like a second heartbeat. It was strange how instinct could be present without showing itself. I had heard that kings carried a wild thing behind their ribs, that their wolves could sense lies like blood. I thought it was poetic. Now I understood it was literal. The corridor door behind me sealed with a sound that felt final. Daxton's gaze lowered to my hands. The chest lid had already begun to soften under my touch, ward warmed to unlock. I could feel the chest responding, old magic waking like embers beneath ash. His eyes snapped up. "Don't," he commanded. Something in me flared. Not defiance for entertainment. Defiance because I refused to be helpless again. I pressed my palm down, finishing what I started. The chest clicked open. And the air filled with a clean, sharp scent, winter salt and silver distilled into something almost holy. Daxton took in a breath. His beast reacted. The pressure in the corridor surged, and at the edge of my hearing I could hear it. Claws on stone. But no claws touched anything. It was as if the wolf inside him paced through the space behind his eyes. Then he moved. Too fast for a human body, slow enough that I could track it. He crossed the corridor in a single fluid motion, snatching the chest lid closed with one gloved hand. My own hands jerked away, not because he touched me, but because his presence tugged my body back like gravity had changed. His gaze held mine. "You will not steal from my realm," he said. There was no cruelty in the words, only certainty. The way a cliff holds certainty that falling is inevitable. "I didn't..." He stepped closer. I smelled cold pine and iron. "I asked," he repeated, voice still low. "That means your refusal to answer will be measured as guilt." I couldn't trust the silence to save me. So I told him the truth. I told him about my brother's fever, about how the storehouse refused me, about how my village became a closed fist when winter squeezed too hard. I told him I broke in because I believed a cure could be taken and returned in gratitude. He listened without blinking. When I finished, his gaze went distant for a heartbeat, like his mind was weighing facts against instincts. Then the corridor trembled again. Something howled outside. I didn't know how else to explain it. The pack was near. Daxton's head tilted slightly, listening to the sound like it was an answer to a prayer. When he spoke again, the tone changed. Not softer, sharper. "The village you came from will lie to you," he said. "They're not lying," I whispered. His eyes sharpened. "Good," he said. "Then you have nothing to fear but the consequences." He turned away from me, and in that moment his authority felt like a door shutting. He called for his guards. Footsteps echoed. Torches flared. Men in fur and steel entered the corridor. I expected chains. I expected punishment. Instead, Daxton instructed them to remove me from the corridor but not harm me. Not harm. The command hit my skin harder than fear. Why would a king who caught me choose restraint? Because of his beast. I felt it even from the moment they grabbed my arms, an internal attention that didn't belong to the guards. The way wolves circle without pouncing. The way pack members watch for weakness and instead find something else. They marched me through halls lined with frozen banners, past portraits of kings whose eyes looked too real. The castle was a monument to isolation. Towering stone, barred windows, corridors that swallowed sound. My wrists burned where their grip tightened, but Daxton didn't follow. He sent me to the cold chambers. Stone walls, a narrow bed, a door so thick it felt like punishment made physical. They tossed me inside and locked it with a final, heavy click. I slid down the wall, breath turning to fog, fingers aching. I tried not to think about my brother's condition worsening with every hour. Hours passed. Then the sound of the castle shifted. Not footsteps. A low, distant growl. My stomach clenched. I stood, pressing my ear to the door. Another sound joined it. Scratching, soft at first, like nails testing wood. Something nosed at the door seam. A wolf. But not the clumsy kind villagers fear. This was controlled curiosity. I stepped back slowly, keeping my hands visible, forcing myself not to panic. The wolf whined once, as if it recognized me. I swallowed. "No," I murmured under my breath. "I'm not yours." The wolf's breathing steadied. Then, quietly, quiet enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it, something warm touched the floor beside my feet. A small bundle of cloth. I crouched and opened it. A strip of dried meat. Coarse salt. Enough to keep hunger from biting through my bones. No guard announced it. No human offered it. Only the pack, acting like someone had commanded them to see me as more than a prisoner. I sat on the stone, meal in my hands, staring at the door as if Daxton might appear through it. But he didn't. The next day they brought me before him. The throne room was carved like a cavern turned into a palace. Black ice columns held up the ceiling. Frost patterns glimmered in the air like trapped stars. A fire burned in a braziers, contained, disciplined, never allowed to rage. Daxton stood at the center, as if the room had been built for him alone. 2 guards flanked me. A third presence stood behind Daxton, an older man with iron gray hair and a scarred left hand. He watched with the tired patience of someone who had survived enough winters to stop believing in miracles. Warden Morik Halver. I remembered him from rumor too. The warden who kept the castle's worst secrets buried. Daxton circled me once, slow and precise. His beast paced under his skin. The air shifted around my throat, as if his wolf was deciding whether I deserved to breathe. Then the warden spoke. "She stole," Morik said flatly. I felt the lie in the sentence, like a gap in the floor. "I took medicine," I answered. "You took what belongs to the king," Morik corrected. "You took it without permission." I clenched my hands. "Permission doesn't exist for people dying in villages," I said. Daxton's gaze snapped to mine. His attention tightened so sharply I almost went still. But he didn't punish my words. Instead, he looked beyond me, toward the high windows. Outside, snow whirled like the world was trying to erase tracks. Then, from behind the throne, a pack of wolves shifted in the shadows. They weren't loose. They weren't random. They sat like sentries. One of them moved forward and lowered its head toward my hands. I held still. The wolf sniffed, then backed away, as if it had found the same answer my body already knew. Daxton spoke again. "The village you fled," he said, "is a liar's mouth. They marked you." My chest tightened. "They didn't." "They did." He walked closer, stopping just short of my reach. His eyes were bright with something restrained. "Your brother's illness," he continued. "It wasn't missed. It was managed." I stared at him, stunned. Managed? As if someone had decided how long he'd suffer. Morek's jaw flexed. Daxton lifted his chin slightly. "Bring her to the records," he commanded. Records. That word turned my blood cold. Cast-out women rarely found their way into archives unless someone wanted proof to destroy them. They led me down to a chamber beneath the throne, where scrolls were kept in sealed cabinets, protected from damp and rot. The air smelled of ink and iron. A clerk opened a cabinet and set a bound ledger on the table. Daxton's hand hovered above the pages without touching. "You will recognize this village," he said. I leaned closer. Names, dates, deliveries, and then rows and rows of messages. The storehouse woman's seal. My own name written as a guilty debt, recorded days before the night I broke into the corridor. Alongside it, another seal. My brother's name. The clerk traced a line with a finger. "They reported her attempt," the clerk said, voice careful, "before she even arrived at the castle." My stomach lurched. I turned my head sharply toward Morek. "What is this?" I demanded. Morek didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "Their lie preceded you," he said. "They wanted a monster, a convenient one." I couldn't breathe properly. The betrayal hit deeper than anger. It felt like being stabbed from the inside. Daxton watched my face as the truth sank in. Not pity. Not satisfaction. Something else. Like he was tracking what would happen to me next. "What did they say I stole?" I whispered. Daxton's gaze lowered to my throat. "Winter salt," he answered, "and distilled silver." My hands trembled. "How?" "Because they needed your brother to die," Morek said quietly. "And they needed the blame placed somewhere that wasn't them." The room swayed. I steadied myself by pressing my palm to the table. Cold stone, ink, steel. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But my power didn't live in violence. Not that kind. My hands knew how to heal, how to bind, how to coax. And now I recognized a new truth. My skills weren't only craft. They were also a kind of magic hidden in ordinary hands. Daxton turned slightly, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. The wolves behind the throne room door shifted again, restless. Then a pack member in the hall, one of the larger males with a scar over its right eye, stalked closer, stopped a step away, and stared at me. I met its gaze. My skin prickled. The wolf's breathing slowed. Then, with careful gentleness, it nudged my hand. Not forcing, inviting. I placed my fingers on the wolf's fur. Warmth seeped into my palm like a promise. The scarred wolf trembled once, and then, without my asking, its head lifted and it made a low whine. Something inside me responded. I felt it like a second heartbeat under my ribs, a hidden current. I blinked hard. Daxton's eyes narrowed. He must have felt it too, because his beast shifted closer. Later, they questioned me again. This time, the questions weren't about what I stole. They were about what I could do. I tried to stay guarded, but they had already taken my agency in the dungeon, kept me from my brother, kept me from searching for the betrayal's source. They acted like I was a problem to be solved, and I was done being solved like I was furniture. I learned the castle's routines, not by being allowed, by being underestimated. They believed locked doors would keep me powerless. They didn't understand that a woman with survival skills learns quickly. So I started small. When they brought me bowls of plain gruel, I asked for cloth and soap. Not as a plea, as a plan. When they ignored my request, I found ways to steal time, washing my own bedding with minimal water, cleaning the floor so it didn't breed sickness. The guards mocked me at first. They called me the thief who scrubs. I took that like an insult and turned it into fuel, because my healing didn't require permission. A week passed, then another. Winter crept deeper into the castle walls. The wolves watched me, not with hunger, with something like expectation. Daxton still didn't soften, not outwardly, but his beast's attention began to follow me like a shadow with teeth. When I walked through the courtyard, pack members turned their heads to track my steps. When I bent to inspect a cut on a stable boy, they hovered without interfering. And every time someone from the castle was hurt, sprained, bruised, coughing through cold, my hands responded before I could think. I didn't fight the men. I didn't threaten Daxton. I simply did what I had always done. Only now my ordinary acts made the wolves restless. They carried my scent to the corners of the castle where magic slept. One night, while I cleaned blood from a stone trough, I found an ache in the world. Not my body, the air. It felt wrong, twisted, like a ward had cracked. I followed the sensation through narrow corridors and down into a storage room where iron tools hung on hooks. There, beneath a layer of old salt sacks, I found something that made my stomach drop. A chain. And in the chain's shadow, a small, curled form, half hidden, trembling. A wolf pup. The pup's breathing was shallow. Its ears were too still. Its fur held frost like a veil. I didn't hesitate. My hands moved without asking. I warmed the pup against my chest. I pressed my fingers to its tiny ribs and listened with my whole body. A heartbeat, but barely. I swallowed and whispered nonsense, the way my mother had once whispered to me when I was sick as a child. I didn't know if the pup could understand words, but I knew warmth and rhythm mattered. I started rubbing its belly slowly, warming skin, coaxing circulation. I breathed into the fur carefully so my breath didn't smother it. Then, from behind me, a sound broke the silence. Daxton's voice. "You should not be here." I flinched, then steadied. "I found it," I said. "It's dying." Daxton stepped into view. He looked carved from ice and fire, frost markings bright against dark skin. His eyes held a storm he wouldn't release. Yet his beast was closer than he was. The air trembled. The wolves outside the room shifted, as if they could sense the pup's fragile life. Daxton didn't order guards. He didn't drag me out. Instead, he watched my hands. I ignored his intensity and kept working. Slowly, the pup's ribs expanded. A weak sound came from its throat. My breath caught. Then the pup opened its eyes, clouded at first, then sharpening as if the world had returned to focus. The pup whined. I pressed my forehead to its fur, relieved so hard it hurt. Daxton's gaze didn't move. He looked not angry, not pleased, but something in his stance changed, like a wall inside him had cracked by a single hairline. He stepped closer. "Why?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Why would a prisoner care for something that belonged to the king who caught her? I lifted my eyes. "Because it's alive," I said, "and because dying should never be the only thing we're good at in winter." Daxton stared a long moment. Then he took a step back. He didn't touch me. He didn't claim gratitude. He simply ordered, "Take it to the healer." He meant for the castle's official healer to handle it. I could feel it. But my chest warmed oddly. His authority wasn't soft, his rules weren't gone, but he was letting me exist in the cracks. In the days that followed, the pup recovered. Its littermates gathered like an orbit around me. One by one, they approached when I made soothing sounds, when I offered warmed water in a shallow bowl. Wolves weren't usually gentle with outsiders. The pack hierarchy was law. But my presence disturbed that law, not by force, by choice. Then came the shocking truth Daxton couldn't ignore. A blizzard struck the realm so hard the northern roads closed. The castle's isolation became more than a comfort. It became a trap. Food supplies stretched. The fire's warmth weakened under pressure, and sickness spread in the barracks. Coughing men curled in their fur. Fever-burned eyes stared at the ceiling like they could bargain with death. Morik came to me in the kitchen corridor one early morning. He didn't bother with threats. "Your hands," he said bluntly. "You can fix this." I looked at him calmly. "Fix it how?" Morik's jaw tightened. "With winter salt, with silver." My mouth went dry. I remembered the chest in the corridor, the chest Daxton had locked the night I arrived, the chest that held the medicine that could save my brother. I remembered thinking I would die here, forgotten, punished, used as an example. But now the castle's need had found my skills again. Morik's tone shifted. "You broke in," he said, as if the words weren't a verdict but a key. "Now you will fix what your village tried to kill." My stomach clenched. "That's not mine," I snapped. "I didn't—" But Morik cut me off. "They already wrote your story," he said. "The only way you survive it is by becoming something stronger than their lie." I realized then that my agency was the only thing they couldn't cage, not if I kept choosing it. I followed Morik to the sealed corridor. Daxton was there. His presence filled the space like a storm contained in a single breath. When I saw the chest, my heart twisted. Anger, grief, hope, all tangled. He didn't explain. He only watched me. I placed my palm on the chest lid. The ward responded to me. That's when I understood the shocking twist. The reason the corridor had called my name wasn't only because I was clever. It was because my blood remembered something my mind had forgotten. My ordinary hands weren't just skills, they were key work. Daxton's beast stirred, as if it recognized the same truth. I unlocked the chest. The winter salt shimmered like snow caught in moonlight. The distilled silver glinted like a vein of captured starlight. When I worked, the magic didn't feel like a spell. It felt like warmth flowing through every scar I'd earned by surviving. I measured salt by pinch. I poured silver into water by breath. I stirred the mixture until it turned from cold to steady. Then I carried it, bare hands, steady rhythm, into the barracks where men were collapsing. I didn't argue. I didn't ask permission. I healed. Around me, the wolves prowled but kept distance, like they understood the human magic needed room to work. One man tried to stand, then collapsed, his eyes rolling with pain. I crouched beside him and pressed my fingers to his throat. My touch wasn't gentle the way stories pretend healing always is. It was firm, direct. I grounded his fever into stillness, like I was teaching his body how to obey again. When his breathing eased, I moved to the next. Hours passed. I stayed in the cold with my own sweat cooling on my skin. My arms shook from exhaustion, yet I kept going until my legs threatened to give. At some point, Daxton appeared at the barracks entrance. He didn't interrupt. He stood like a silhouette carved into winter, watching me work. His pack, wolves and sentries, formed a perimeter so tight no one could crowd me. Their behavior made something clear. He wasn't only protecting his realm, he was protecting me while he figured out why. When I finally collapsed beside a healed man and realized the fever had broken, my chest heaved in harsh breaths. I looked up. Daxton was still there. Morik hovered behind him, arms crossed, as if he didn't trust his own hope. Daxton's gaze dropped to my hands. There was tenderness there, restrained so tightly it resembled grief. Then he spoke. "You were born for this," he said. I wanted to laugh. Born for this. Born to be betrayed. Born to be cast out. Born to break into a king's corridor and get punished for caring. But when I opened my mouth, my voice came out quieter than I expected. "Then why did no one save me before I found you?" I asked. Daxton didn't answer with words. His beast answered instead. A wolf stepped forward, nudged my shoulder, and pressed its head against my upper arm like a claim of companionship. Not ownership, connection. I stared at the wolf, then at Daxton. His eyes never left mine. The walls in him shifted again. Slow, painful, but real. The final twist came with sunrise. As the blizzard loosened, tracking paths reopened. Riders returned with news. The village that had cast me out wasn't only lying, it was preparing to finish what it started. My brother's fever wasn't an accident. He had been left to die, to make me carry guilt for stealing. Then the village would take the winter salt resources meant for the sick and use it to pay the king's taxes without ever addressing their own cruelty. They planned to show my crime to the outlying clans as proof that the king's realm punished thieves. A woman like me would be the story, a lesson, a sacrifice. Daxton listened as Morag relayed the information. The room's temperature dropped. His beast paced. Wolves pressed closer to the door. Yet Daxton didn't move toward violence. He moved toward me. He stood in front of me where I sat with exhaustion still in my bones. The guards waited, unsure. Morag watched like he feared what might happen if the king's restraint broke. Daxton knelt, not fully, but enough to bring his gaze level with mine. The wolves lowered their heads, giving space. "Come with me," he said. I blinked. "Where?" "To your village," he answered, "so you can stop being their lie." My breath caught. Fear surged, fear of what I'd find, of what the betrayal had become. But anger had already transformed into something steadier. Purpose. I stood slowly. My legs protested. I ignored them. "I'm not asking for permission," I said. "I'm choosing." Daxton's eyes sharpened. His beast growled low as if approving. And then he made a promise with actions, not speeches. He ordered the pack to escort us, not drag me, not hide me. Escort. Protection. Forced proximity, but with agency. My choice to be close. My choice to step forward. We traveled through snowdrifts so deep they swallowed boot prints. The world outside the castle became a white blur of survival. When we reached the village, the people pretended we were too far to be real. They laughed when they saw me. They pointed at the guards. They spoke as if Daxton were a rumor and I was a mistake. But they didn't understand pack instincts. Wolves stood in a ring around me, their eyes fixed on the villagers like warnings carved into fur. Not once did they lunge. They waited. The king waited too, like he was forcing himself not to become the monster their story wanted. He allowed them to talk. Then he asked questions in a voice that didn't rise. Simple questions. Dates, seals, names. People flinched when asked. When they tried to blame me again, their words fell apart under the weight of the ledger evidence Morag produced. Morag's scarred hand held the ledger like a weapon made of truth. I watched my own handwriting on paper from days before I ever reached the castle. The village storehouse woman's seal. And beside it, my brother's sign, forced into certainty. I staggered back. Not from fear. From the final realization that my brother hadn't merely been sick. He'd been used. Somewhere in the chaos of the revelation, I realized the person who truly betrayed me wasn't only the storehouse keeper. It was the person who decided love had no value unless it could be traded for survival. Daxton's hand hovered near my elbow. He didn't grab. He waited for me to lean in. When I did, the warmth of his presence steadied me. The wolves didn't stop guarding. They tightened the circle. Then, when the village finally admitted my brother had been moved into an abandoned hut at the edge of the snow, Daxton ordered that we fetch him. We found him weak, frost biting the edges of his skin. His eyes fluttered open when he recognized me. No words could explain what he wanted to say. I sat beside him and held his hand. I didn't let myself collapse into grief. I healed. My ordinary hands returned to work. But this time, the healing didn't feel like only skill. It felt like destiny being written into the body. Winter salt eased the fever. Silver clarified his breath. I worked until his eyes sharpened from dull gray to something alive. When he could finally speak, he whispered my name, his voice like broken thread. "I tried," he said, coughing. Tried. Meaning he'd fought for me as long as he could. Meaning the betrayal was larger than him. It was the village. It was the system. It was everyone who benefited from my suffering. I pressed my forehead to his. "I know," I whispered back. Then I turned toward Daxton. My legs still shook, my hands still burned, but my gaze didn't flinch. I was no longer begging for mercy. I was claiming my future. Daxton looked at me as if he finally understood the difference between a woman who steals and a woman who survives. He didn't speak love. He didn't speak promises. He spoke command, quiet and steady. "Return to the castle," he said. "You will not be exiled again." I opened my mouth to refuse because pride demanded it. Then the truth landed. He wasn't trying to trap me. He was trying to offer a place where my agency could grow without being punished. I swallowed and nodded once. In the days that followed, Daxton started letting his walls down in ways I could measure. He stopped ordering everything around me. He started asking. He asked what herbs I needed. He asked how I preferred the ward oils. He listened to my answers instead of correcting them. And his beast, his pack, began to treat me not as a prisoner to manage, but as a presence the realm needed. One night, as storm winds rattled the windows, I walked the corridor beneath the frozen banners. I felt the hidden current again, like a thread connecting my hands to the castle's old magic. I found a carved groove on the wall, where no one had ever told me to look. It was warm. It pulsed like a heartbeat. I traced it with my fingertips. The groove lit faintly, frost pattern blooming into shape. The wolf-scarred pup approached, then lowered itself to watch. Then another pup joined, and another. A brood of winter eyes. I didn't understand why, until I realized the groove wasn't only a ward, it was a bond mark. Daxton appeared behind me silently. Of course he did. Even in isolation, his presence carried like thunder. I turned slowly. He looked tired in a way I'd never seen before, tired from holding himself together. "I didn't lock you away," he said. I stared. "Then why did you?" I asked. His beast growled, low and restrained, like it wanted to answer with action. Instead, Daxton stepped closer and held out something in his palm. A small iron token carved with the same frost knot pattern. "This is what the ward wanted," he said. "Not theft, not punishment. Selection." Selection. My throat tightened. "So I'm what?" Daxton's eyes held mine. "Something my realm has been waiting for," he said. "Something your village feared because it would make you harder to control." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "That's not fair," I whispered. "None of this is fair." His beast shifted and pressed its forehead into my hip, not pushing, just grounding. Then Daxton lowered his gaze to the token. "Fairness is for people who get to choose," he said. "You learned to choose after they stole it." He paused, breathing fog into the cold air. Then his voice softened in the only way it could without breaking his pride. "You aren't trapped with me," he said. "You are chosen by the same magic that chose my beast to stop hunting you." My heart hammered. In the distance, wolves whined softly, an expectant chorus. It felt like the pack knew something I didn't yet have words for. I stared at the bond mark on the wall, then at Daxton. And I made my own decision. I took the iron token. The moment it touched my palm, warmth blossomed up my arm. Frost patterns flared in my skin like hidden veins. A pulse answered. The corridor lights deepened. Daxton's beast let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. He didn't declare me. He didn't claim ownership. He simply stepped back and waited for me to decide what this bond meant. That was the slowest kind of intimacy. The kind that didn't rush. The kind that grew. I pressed the token into the carved groove. It locked with a soft click. The wall warmed, then settled. The bond mark completed. Daxton's eyes closed briefly as if the realm itself had exhaled. Then he opened them and looked at me with something raw enough that it almost hurt to witness. His voice dropped. "Now," he said, "you will let me protect you without earning it." I swallowed. I wanted to deny him. I wanted to prove I didn't need anyone, but my hands were no longer ordinary. My survival had become power, and power deserved a home. So I stepped closer. I didn't reach for his hands immediately. I let the wolves watch. I let the pack's quiet presence confirm what my heart was already deciding. Daxton offered his palm anyway. I placed my fingers there, warm against cold. Then I curled my hand around his. No ceremony, just contact. His beast trembled like a wall finally giving way. In the days after, the realm changed around us. Betrayal became consequence. Lies became exposed, and my brother, alive, healed, guarded by Daxton's pack, stopped seeing himself as useless. He began to help around the castle because he wanted to earn his survival instead of waiting to be spared. Daxton didn't become a different man overnight. He remained terrifying in the way storms remain storms. But he stopped treating me like a problem. He started treating me like a chosen partner. His walls came down slowly, in the only way I would accept, through trust built by ordinary acts, through shared meals, through me humming while I braided winter herbs into salves, through him standing guard outside the healer's room while I worked, not because he had to, but because the pack demanded it. One night, when the storm eased and the stars returned, I sat at the edge of the frozen courtyard with the scarfed token cooling in my pocket. Daxton joined me without fanfare. His cloak brushed my shoulder, light contact, asking permission. I leaned into it. He exhaled. The wolves settled around us like sleeping shadows. No one spoke for a while. Then I turned my face slightly and looked at him. "Why did you lock the chest that night?" I asked. His gaze held mine. His beast shifted. The answer came in a slow confession disguised as a warning. "Because I smelled a lie in you," he said quietly. "And because my beast feared the cost of letting you touch what could kill you." My throat tightened. "And now?" I asked. Daxton's eyes flickered. "Now my beast knows you won't steal from us again," he said. "You will build with us." I studied him. I didn't want pretty lies. I wanted truth. So I asked for it. "Then tell me the truth you've been swallowing." Daxton's jaw flexed. The wolves went still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then he spoke, and his beast answered the silence like music. "I didn't choose you because you were weak," he said. "I chose you because you were forced into surviving. And something in me has always recognized the kind of strength that doesn't beg, it becomes." My breath caught. I stared at him as my heart, wounded, trained, and finally unchained, decided it could trust. I reached up and brushed my thumb along the frost-white marking on his cheekbone. He didn't flinch. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat and let my touch remind him he wasn't alone. Then he opened them and caught my gaze. We stayed like that, held by the pack and the bond-marked magic in the stone. Slow burn, not because we were cautious, because we were healing. Because both of us had been broken by stories written by people who wanted control. Now we refused to be controlled. Now the Alpha King and the exiled woman chose each other, not in a rush, Not with declarations meant to impress an audience, but with quiet decisions made over and over until destiny felt inevitable. And when dawn finally rose over the northern realm, my hands didn't feel like tools stolen from a thief's life. They felt like a destiny finally allowed to belong somewhere warm.